Well, hello and welcome to today's webinar. Welcome to the United States of America. You're hired, a guide for foreign-born job seekers seeking jobs. I'm your co-host, John Link, Director of Webster University's Career Planning and Development Center in St. Louis, and Director of Communications and Advancement for the Midwest Association of Colleges and Employers.
Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Karl Aldrich. I am your other co-host for today's webinar, and I am the Director of Finance for MWACE, and I am the Director of the Career Resources Center in the Chaffetz School of Business at St. Louis University.
Today's webinar will feature Betsy Cohen, Executive Director of the St. Louis Mosaic Project, a program at the World Trade Center St. Louis within the St. Louis Economic Development Partnership, and author of Welcome to the U.S.A. You're Hired, a guide for foreign-born job seekers seeking jobs. If you're interested in purchasing Betsy's book, I am including information in the chat box for you to reference. To our participants, thank you for joining us today. Please use the chat box if you have any questions that you would like for Karl and I to direct to Betsy, and we'll make sure that we have plenty of time at the end of today's presentation or conversation so we can continue that from what you are all including in the chat box.
And Betsy, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you being here. If we could start out, can you describe the book for us, give us an overview and talk about your motivation behind writing it?
Thanks, Karl. It's very interesting about why this book came to be. And I have had 9 years leading the St. Louis Mosaic Project with the goal of attracting and retaining foreign-born people to the St. Louis region. And this has been based on how we as a region can grow and have more diversity and more talent, more prosperity, and also how can we be a more welcoming region. And what happened to me personally was during COVID and working from home in my work, last March, exactly a year ago, right this week, I was really struggling with how could I do more, because I was coaching people. We were meeting virtually, but we weren't doing a lot of the in-person activities. And I was thinking, I'm posting a lot on LinkedIn, and people had said to me, Betsy, why don't you write a book with all your tips? It's hard to find them on LinkedIn because you have a tip here, a tip here, a tip here. And so I was trying to decide how could I personally have more impact and purpose in my life, and what could I do to help more people? And so I decided that it maybe would be a good idea to write a book with what I have learned. And I researched. And what I found out was there is no book on the market for foreign-born people in the United States who are looking for a job, and that nobody else knew what I have learned over these past 9 years. And so it really became part of a personal mission for me to say, how can I help more people? And it's interesting because I went to my employer and I said, I'm going to write this on my own time and at my own expense for all the work, for the graphics, the editing, the proofing, everything. And were they okay if I wrote it on my own time? But it is certainly based and linked to all the work. And I've done work, of course, with Karl, with John, with all of our universities. And they said, fine. And so we had an agreement that if I did it on my own time, that I could share what I've learned. So I did this really out of a personal desire to make what I have learned available to more people. And some of it is at a very high level, and some of it is things that are really very basic and nuts and bolts about what to wear or what to eat or what to do or what not to do. And that felt very personal. And sometimes I would say to myself, should I put that in this book or should I not? And then I said, if I would tell someone that, then I'm going to put it in the book. So I started writing last year, March, April, May, and literally between May and September, it happened. And the book got launched on Citizenship Day in September. And it was very fast because I felt that the timing was right. And there are two reasons I felt the timing was right. And that's really important, particularly for our international students and our economy, because unemployment is low. And that's a good time for international students and others to be looking for a job, because you don't hear people say, oh, we have such high unemployment. Why would international people be a good for the job? And secondly, there was an opening with a new federal administration and a new president to be more welcoming to our international talent than the prior administration had been. And so I saw that if I could get this book done by fall, it would fit right into a good time that I could help more people, and that we would also have more employers who would be saying, how can I find international people to help fill the jobs I have? And, before this started today, John and Karl were just talking about how many jobs are being posted at the university. So many employers need talent. And so I think that this really opens up an opportunity as we get into a post-COVID timeframe for international talent to be viewed in a more positive way than we've seen probably over the past 6 years at least. And so I think we can help the economy as well as help each of you individually. And those of you that are advising international talent, this is that window. And I think with what you can read in the book and hear from me, you'll see that this is the time. So I can tell you a little bit about the book, and I'll tell you about what the stages are. If you want me to move into that, John, Karl, is it a good time for me to talk about what I talk about?
Absolutely.
Yes, please.
Great. Well, the book is divided into 6 stages. And I do think that the first stage is something I really want to spend a moment on. The first stage is really about the stress that foreign-born people go through when they're looking for a job that's really different than what native-born people go through. So, and I'll talk about that in a moment. I talk about the stress. The next chapter is about what do you need to do before you start to interview, the pre-interviewing stage. Then I talk about interviewing. How does that go? What do American, interviewers look for? I talk about how to manage job offers. And then I discuss how do you work in a company? How do you advance in a company? What is important? And then I have a number of very special cases, one of which is international students. And part of the charm of the book is that I have 12 expert contributors who help me, and they contributed to different chapters. So the first section of the book is about stress. And this is something that our international job seekers have more stress, no surprise, than those of us that were born in the United States. Now, this has always been true because often our foreign-born job seekers are dealing with family around the world, visas, timing, the variances in currency, for example, that can affect their ability, their scholarship opportunities, their applications. All these activities put a lot of stress. And certainly what is going on in the world right now with Ukraine, Russia, Europe. For those of you that are working with international people, the stress on people is intense. And for us at the World Trade Center and with Mosaic, I'm already hearing again from a lot of the people we work with about their families and what's going on and the needs, and it's heartbreaking what's going on. And so trying to be empathetic and understand that situation is so fluid and changing. And so what are the stresses? And I think people are going to be under stress and they're going to have things that are changing. So someone who thought they could immediately start like looking for a job or they were going to graduate, that all might shift. And so we have to truly understand what that means. And I think it also relates to the job search itself, that things that might feel comfortable and someone might feel confident, they were confident 3 weeks ago, but next week they may not have that same degree of confidence. So we have to be very sensitive to that and understand. And the book talks a lot about the stress. And so for someone who's foreign born, what are your stresses? How do you manage that? How do you set up time to walk? How do you get a mentor? How do you manage your own stress so that you can also manage what is stressful by normal definitions in a job search? The next stage of the book on the pre-interviewing is so important for international people and international students particularly. And that really works on the topic of networking, LinkedIn, what you need to do to understand the job market. And this is something that I have seen in my years with the Mosaic Project, that sometimes I will get a note from someone saying, I'm graduating in a month and I need a job for my OPT. And you're like, it's not going to happen in a month. You really need to start thinking and advising international students and international people way earlier to begin that process of building their network, building those relationships. Because a lot of what happens in the job market, and particularly when you have to work with international visas and timing, is you need to have people who've built authentic relationships with you, and that takes time. And so in that chapter of the book, I talk a lot and have different experts who've discussed how do you build that network? How do you not just stay with the people who come from your country, but how do you form relationships with other people at the school, with your roommate's family, with a club, with an activity. So for example, if you're in engineering, St. Louis has an engineering club. They have an office on Lindell. How can you break out of the university and start to meet other people who are in the engineering field in St. Louis? And there are ways you can do this. So for example, we have an Asian American Chamber of Commerce. We have a Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. We're going to have a new Afghan Chamber of Commerce. So there are many ways you can build that network, but it's really important that you as an individual, if you're going to be looking for a job in the United States, you need to build those relationships really before you start looking for a job, because it's those people that are going to introduce you to other people. And those are the people that will write a recommendation for you. Those are the people that will help you find someone who is going to see your value. And that is really important. When you get into the interviewing stage, and I hear this all the time, there are several kinds of interviews. And I've been talking to some people who've been going to job fairs. And it's really interesting because several of them wrote me and they said, oh, Betsy, because you told me about this, I knew what kind of an interview the person started doing with me. And the book discusses the fact that there are often two kinds of interviews. One is called a chronological interview, where someone will say, tell me what you did, and then tell me what happened next, and tell me what happened next, and tell me what happened next. The other kind of interview is more of a behavioral interview, or it might be called the STAR technique. And in this way, if I'm the interviewer, I'm going to probe more deeply when you tell me you did something, or you had a result, or you accomplished something. And I'll say, Karl, tell me more about that. Tell me about that again. Tell me more. Tell me what happened. Tell me what happened then. Because some of the employers have found that someone could tell them a good story about what they've done, but when they get hired, they really can't work with the team and really deliver. So many companies are using a more behavioral method. And so if you read the book and talk to people, when you get into an interview situation, you'll know immediately, are they asking me a chronological interview? Or do they really want me to go in depth with an experience that I can share? And that is extremely important. When you get a job interview, there's language in the book. And this is something really interesting because what I have found is often in the international community, you may come from a country where there is no negotiation when you get a salary offer, or there may be a lot of negotiation. But in the book, I discuss what I have seen to be effective. And, John and Karl may have some thoughts on this, but, my knowledge, I explain what happens when you get a job offer. And for international people, there are often ways where you may need to negotiate. For example, you may be told in the job offer that there are 10 days of vacation. Well, you may go back and say, I would like to get 5 more additional days of vacation because I need to return to India or to South Korea. So there are things that you could ask when you get a job offer, not just money, but it could be, the flexibility. It could be the time off that you need. And so thinking about how you ask for what you need, how do you do it in a way that the employer feels positive towards you, versus if you say it in such a way that they may feel you are being too demanding and they think, oh my gosh, this person is someone I don't want to work with. But I talk about how do you do that in a delicate way so that you get what you want. And if you're advising international students who may come from different cultures, this is important because there are ways that you can negotiate pieces of a job offer, but the style in which it is done is extremely important. Another part of the book talks about what happens when you join a company. And what are some of the things that I have seen? When I had my corporate career for 30 years, I worked with a lot of international people. And what I saw there and what I continue to see is often international people put their head down, they work hard, and then they see other people get promoted and they don't get promoted. And they're like, why? If I'm the smartest and I'm doing the best job, why am I not getting promoted? And so I talk about in the book, and some of the other contributors discuss as well, that in the United States, one thing that's very important is what they call the likability factor. It's not always how smart you are, but it's, are you likable? Do you have relationships and a personal rapport with John, with Karl, with Betsy? And so in the book, I talk about what are those topics you could use? How can you build a relationship with me? Because often what I have seen is if you want to get promoted, you need to be someone that has a rapport and a relationship with the people on your team, with the people above you, with people across the organization. And there are some important ways that you can build that. And one of the ways I talk about that is joining an employee resource group or a business resource group, ERG or BRG, that's in the companies. And this is something that if you're an international student, it's really important to understand that a lot of companies and organizations now have these employee resource groups. So if you're looking to join Bayer or Emerson, they have a Hispanic resource group. And there are people who are officers of that organization, and you can find them. If you are connecting on LinkedIn, you can see who is in the Somos Emerson group, and you could find out who's that Hispanic leader and what are the other Hispanic people in Emerson doing and who are they? And you can find them on LinkedIn. You could talk to them, and that could all be part of what you do before you ever even interview or join a company. And once you join a company, there are some really strong benefits if you join those employee resource groups, because you start to make friends across the organization. And they can tell you about the hidden job market. They can tell you about things that are changing, and they can help make you much more desirable so that when you are applying for an internal job or an external job, you are someone that people really want. What I want to talk to you about now is the special chapters in the book. And I'm going to focus on the one about international students. So I'm going to read you a couple of case studies. In the book, what I do is I have these very short case studies, and I explain what worked and what didn't work. And on Amazon, when people write reviews, everyone loves the case studies, because I think that when you're an international person and you say, oh, that happened to me, or I know that that happened. And so if you're an advisor and you read these case studies, you'll say, oh, I didn't know that. And sometimes there are advisors that are new to guiding international students, and you don't always understand what's different versus an American native-born job seeker. And when you read these case studies, it gives you some insight. So I'm going to read you a few that talk about some of the different experiences that can happen. Okay, so this case study is about Kung, a marketing student from Vietnam. Kung was an international student who had a marketing degree, which was non-STEM. He was doing his 1 year of optional practical training in a company, and he expected that he'd return to Vietnam at the end of the year when his visa expired through the university. But he met an American citizen, he got engaged, so his fiancée visa, followed by marriage, allowed him to stay. He ultimately became an American citizen. What I talk about in the book is sometimes you don't know. You might think you're staying, but then something may end up with the work and you do end up going to your home country, or something may change, such as getting married, where you end up staying in this country, even though you thought that you might be leaving. So here's another case study of Pierre, an international student from France. Pierre was graduating soon with a STEM degree. He was applying to jobs and wanted to know how to answer the question on the online application, will you need visa sponsorship? He believed that if he answered yes, his application would not move forward. And because he could work for 3 years with his STEM degree, he didn't technically need the visa sponsorship yet, although he would down the road if the company wanted to retain him. And what is important is that the companies do need to know, and you have to answer honestly, if you will need sponsorship down the road. But one of the things that I am seeing now, which is a benefit or a silver lining out of COVID, is that because of the ability to work remotely, some of the companies that thought, well, what if I have an international student who works for 1 year or 3 years and I can't keep them? Because so many companies are now having positive experience with people working remotely, that may not be a negative anymore. You may be able to stay working for that organization if you return to your home country. And then there might even be another opportunity for you to return back to the United States. So here's a case study that actually involved a true story about some St. Louis University students that worked with me. And the case study doesn't say that it's St. Louis University, but it actually was. And the case study says a team of international students from a local university do a project. A team of international students did a final capstone research project for their degree. This was done for the St. Louis Mosaic Project. The students did company interviews in the community. They did reviews with their workplace project supervisor, and they presented a final report. They got to see how a US organization worked. They talked with US employers, and they built their confidence for future job searches. And this was very interesting because the 4 international students that did a project with me, they got to see how our organization worked, and then they did interviews with other companies. So they had insights into other companies. And I think my point here is that you can get experience by doing a project with someone like me in an organization, or doing an internship, or doing it through a case study or a project for your casework. And this, again, gives you some people that you'll meet in a company. And then those people in turn find out that they care about you and they want to see you succeed. And one of the words that I use in the book, particularly about international students, is that you need to think about how can you make yourself irresistible. And if you write down one word from my talk right now, write down the word irresistible. Because for you to be hired by an employer in the United States, you have to be irresistible. They have to like you. They have to want you. They have to want to spend $5,000 or $10,000 of legal fees. They need to go through certain hurdles. They need to apply. They need to write a work plan. And if you're just smart and good and come across as a really bright person, they're not going to do that for you. You have to be irresistible. So my question is, how do you make yourself irresistible? So for example, if you come in and you're talking with me, if you find out that I really like Indian restaurants, maybe you bring me some garam masala and you bring me a spice and we talk about that. So you have to find ways to break through the clutter, to find that rapport and really make yourself stand out. So I'm going to read about a graduate student in biosciences from India, Adesh, a graduate student in biosciences from India. Adesh had exceedingly unique skills and globally recognized peer-reviewed papers. He wanted to understand if a lawyer could help him get a visa based on his skills, not based on an employer. The O and the E visas have some opportunities in this way. He consulted with several lawyers and hired one to pursue a visa based on his exceptional level of scientific abilities and proven success. And I want to say that the current Biden administration is looking for more ways to use visas for STEM, high-skilled international students to get approved to stay. And so it's important that you understand and work with your DSO at the university, your international student officers, and really understand that if you are in particularly a STEM field, what more could you do to make yourself that valuable where you might be able to sponsor yourself forward for a special visas? Do you need a new paper? Do you need a research project? What can you do to prove to the United States that you are truly unique? And again, I think our country is looking for ways for you to prove that now. It's more open than ever. And so I think it's kind of going to fall on you with your international student offices to think about how to do that. So what I also want to say is, here's the last case study I'm going to read is on Lakshmi, a social work student from India. Lakshmi was looking for a job that would ultimately result in sponsorship or a longer stay in the United States beyond her 1 year of OPT. She evaluated the kinds of organizations that have international roles for which sponsorship might be possible and other work opportunities where the employer could apply for a visa without going through the annual visa lottery, which is possible through hospitals and certain research organizations. She got an OPT work opportunity that related to her social work, and she kept looking for roles that would allow her to stay longer. She ultimately did return to India, but did have the benefit of 1 year of work experience to build her resume for the future. And in fact, I actually do know of an international social work graduate who did get sponsored for a visa H-1B through a hospital in St. Louis and with a social work degree, and did get to stay based on his specialty, but that may happen or it may not. In the international student section, there is a whole special chapter that Global Detroit writes. Global Detroit has more international students even than the St. Louis region. Our St. Louis region has about 9,000 international students, and Global Detroit, working with the University of Michigan, has even more. And so they contributed a whole section about international students, and particularly the things that they highlight, and I want to reiterate to you, which is so important if you work with international students, is starting early. The starting early is what's so important, because you have to make these networks, these relationships, these LinkedIn, these friendships, you need to start them early. You cannot start them 2 or 3 months before you're going to look for OPT or CPT. You need to start early. So Global Detroit talks about starting early and what they understand. They talk about preparing strong application materials, leveraging networking, practicing your interviews. And this is great. And you can even Zoom record yourself doing an interview. And one of the things I also talk about in the book is how can you like tape notes up onto your screen? And how do you talk to the right people during the interview? Something that international students often do is that they may come from a country that is more hierarchical. So if there are 3 people interviewing them on a Zoom screen, they may talk to the senior person and not talk to the more junior person. But in the United States, it's really important that you talk to everybody equally because that's more of the American culture. So understanding that and being mindful of that is really important. And the last thing that Global Detroit talks about is being positive. Looking for a job is hard. It's hard work. It's emotional. It's exhausting. And there are a lot of ways that you can be frustrated. And so having someone not in your family or not at school, but having someone who can be a mentor, a coach, someone who can be your buddy to keep your spirits up is so important because it's just hard. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It's hard for native born people finding jobs, not as much right now because there are more jobs, but it is hard. It's emotional. And you may be told by an employer, oh, you're going to hear from us. And then you don't. And the other thing that can happen is someone may respond to you because right now there's such urgency to hire. They may say that they give you an offer the next day and they want you to decide immediately when you think you're going to have another interview with another company next week. What do? Do you accept that first offer or do you not? So there are a lot of things that are very stressful, very important, but you can really make that better for you if you can have a mentor or a coach, maybe someone who understands the American system and can be there as a sounding board to help you navigate through this because there are new times ahead. And I think that right now it's a particularly good time because there are so many openings and international students have so much to offer. And international people in this country have so much to offer and there are more opportunities than ever. So those are some of the key points that I wanted to make. And I'm going to turn it back to John and Karl and others and see what kind of discussions and questions you have that we can have a discussion and that I can help with.
Betsy, I have a quick question for those of us that work with employers. Do you have any advice on how we can help promote recruiting international talent to our employer partners?
So for example, the Mosaic Project has Mosaic ambassador companies. We have 50 of them. We are holding an event for them on March 30th. And we have one of the immigration lawyers in town talking about how it's opening up for more STEM degrees and how it's opening up to get approval for more visas and how they might be able to hire international talent and then have them stay in terms of a visa or work remotely. So I think it's education. And I, would be happy to work with you all and discuss, do we do some education sessions about some of the changing immigration law that some of the corporations would have their HR and their talent acquisition teams might want to hear about, because I think we're seeing it opening up. And I think that education is really important.
Thank you.
Other thoughts or questions? I can tell you a little bit more about what we're seeing. We're seeing that the companies that have hired international people in the past are doing more of it. They are looking at expanding who they hire. They are having more opportunities that they're posting. But I can say that a lot of what happens still is going through what we call the hidden job market. And this means that people are having to understand that the network of where the openings are is coming through the network of people that you have. And when I'm talking with international students and with those that are guiding international students, I look at their LinkedIn networks and I look at who they have on them and I look at how many people they have. I look at what they're posting. I look at whether that international student is connecting and posting things that relate to their job interests, or are they just passive? You have to be more interactive. You have to engage. You have to comment on other people's postings. And LinkedIn is really where that happens. And so I see that that is something that the students that are getting more interviews, that is what is happening, that they are engaging at a higher level. I also see right now that we're going to start to have more things in person, and that when people show up, that is where they can start to form those relationships. And that is where it makes a difference, you know, because it's this bond. And if you come from a culture that is more reserved, you're going to have to learn to make more small talk. And the areas that I focus on for small talk are 5 different areas: sports, travel, food, pets, and really other kinds of personal interests that you might have, or that you might learn about somebody else. Because what's really important is that you need to form bonds, not just to be a smart candidate. And this is something that I sometimes have had a disagreement with the university career guidance. And again, I don't know what John and Karl think about it, but sometimes there's guidance to not put personal interests on the bottom of your resume and keep it all professional. My experience in my corporate life and here is, I believe that it helps to put several personal interests at the bottom of your resume, but only if they're the kind of personal interest that is going to engage me. I don't want to see something that says that you're doing a solitary activity that is not going to be something that is interest to me. Like if you love to read, or if you're a marathon runner. I mean, I just think things that are loners are not likely to connect with someone who's interviewing. But I think that if you put things down that, you know, what you love, or that you're part of some organizations or clubs, or that you're part of a swim team, or whatever it might be, where then I, as an interviewer, can engage with you or get to know you personally, as well as knowing you professionally, it helps me. And I think that that's something when you're walking into the room, it's important. When I interview people, knowing a little bit about them and also feeling comfortable pronouncing their name. And this is something that I talk about in the beginning of the book, which is something that has a political overtone about whether you use an Americanized name or not. But how do you make it comfortable for me as an interviewer to feel comfortable with you? And I see different sides of the question about whether you should put an Americanized name to use on your resume or not. And there's some pros and cons I talk about in the book. You know, I personally find it easier if I can have a shortened version of a very long, difficult name, so that if I'm going to walk down the hall and introduce you to Karl, it's easy for me to do that. And to have a nickname that's in quotes. And then also, when I get to know you, you can say, oh, my real name, I would love it if you would learn to pronounce it. But I do know that many international people truly do respect and want their own full name used. And if that's how you feel, then you should do it. And just know that it's going to be harder for those that are interviewing you and hiring you to say your name and get comfortable with it. But again, I'm interested in what you think about that, because you know, it's a choice that you have to make. And again, it's one of the things that, as you advise international people in their job search, it's something that you have to talk about. And it's something that I think if you don't talk about it and you avoid it, you're not helping them. You know, it's a little bit like some of the personal things that I talk about in the book, such as making sure that people shower before they have an interview and making sure that they don't smoke that day. And I almost didn't put those in the book. But really, you know, I do find for a lot of international people, and in my corporate career with an international company, there were a lot of smokers, and that does not play well often if you're in an interview with an American interviewer, in the same way that hygiene habits are different around the world. So I think these are important if you're an international student, or if you're guiding international students, to have these knowledges of what might be different and appropriate in their culture. And then how do you let them understand what is important here, so that they are knowledgeable and go into that knowing the best way to put themselves forward. John, Karl, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, all of those are really great points. And a question just actually came in to me directly, specifically about, I think Karl mentioned something, inquired about the employer relations and working with employers to better promote opportunities for their international students. When working with international students, and specifically when working with employers, how do you recommend international students screening employers during their initial review of opportunities to really assess if there is an inclusive environment for them, just beyond what they may already have existing on their websites, like affinity groups for diverse groups. How do you recommend kind of really researching which employers would be most inclusive of that specific group?
I think that's an interesting way to think about it. I think there are several ways that you could look at a company. Certainly, you need to look at their website and see if they have, do they talk about diversity? How broad, when they talk about diversity, inclusion, and belonging, how big is that? Do they also include foreign-born in that, or is it only about, one specific race, or is it only about abilities? You can look at their leadership team, see who makes up their leadership team. Look at the board of directors of the organization. See what is the makeup of those groups. There's a website, myvisajobs.org, and it's either myvisajobs.org or myvisajobs.com. I think it's .com. And if you look there, they show all the visas that have been applied for by companies. And so you can look by company or by city, and you can see, have they applied for visas before? The other thing is you can do a LinkedIn search. So if you put in the name of, you can put in the name of the company, St. Louis, and you can put words in, and you can see if there are people who look like you. And you can look and see, you can see if they have an affinity group. And you can reach out to someone in the affinity group that relates to who you are, and say, how are they doing for people like us? The other thing is you can talk to other people in the community. So, if you are from, whatever country it might be, if you go to one of our chambers, or if you are as part of the Pan-Asian community, our O.C.A. organization, or our Asian American Chamber of Commerce, we have a Hispanic leadership group, we have a Hispanic chamber, there's a Bosnian chamber, there's an African chamber. Our African chamber and Vitendo for Africa are very, very busy. And each of these organizations, they have members who are all employees of those organizations. And so if you contact somebody at the African chamber and say, I'm wondering how this company X is doing with people who are from various countries within Africa, they will say to you, oh yes, several of our members work at that company. Or no, we really have never had anybody in our organization who actually is at that company, but we know this about them. So again, I think you might find out that either that company is doing business with your country in the world, or that they have employees, or that they have interests. But you have to do some sleuthing and some navigation. And I think it's doable. What also happens at the career fairs, and I know Karl and I have talked about this at St. Louis University, is that again, sometimes it's awkward because the companies, if you just walk to the table, they may say they do or don't hire international students, and that may or may not be true. It just may be what that person that day does or doesn't know about the ability to hire international talent. So it sometimes takes digging deeper. We also have Mosaic ambassador companies at the Mosaic website, at stlmosaicproject.org. And we have those that are gold companies and those that are silver. The gold companies are those that have sponsored a visa at some time. It may not be for an international student. It could be for a senior executive. And the silver are those that don't sponsor. But I will tell you, and this is something that, it's kind of a secret, but all those companies that say they don't sponsor visas, almost every one of them, I know that they at some point have sponsored a visa because somebody was irresistible, and they were so taken with that person's skill and their leadership ability, their relationships, their charm, their ability to make a difference, their ability to add to the diversity, that even though that company says they don't sponsor visas, I have examples in almost every company in St. Louis where they actually have done it for the right person. So again, I just tell you, it's really about those personal attributes that you bring to it, in addition to all your academic skills and your degrees, the projects. Another thing I really do think that you can break the barrier is bring show and tell when you have an interview. I do see in the last 2 weeks, we have a lot more people that are in person. I'm going to be in person in my office tomorrow for the first time in a long time. And when you start having interviews and discussions, if you bring in a project you did, if you bring in a report and you put it in front of me and say, Betsy, let me show you this, you come alive. And I think for international people who can sometimes be reserved and not as comfortable with language, if you have a project to show, you can come alive and really I can see how much you care about your work. And so again, I don't think there are any rules. I think that you can make those, you can break those barriers or the boundaries. You know, you might say, well, no one brings show and tell. Well, you can bring show and tell. You can bring show and tell about your work. You can bring show and tell about my company. And I really do believe if you learn about my company and you bring something in that shows me that you understand what I do and what my product is or my service, I'm going to find you to be a very interesting candidate. So for example, when people interview at Enterprise, you know, I always recommend, you know, rent a car, try and rent a car from 3 organizations. And when you go into Enterprise, show them that you tried to rent a car and what was your experience like and what can you bring to the discussion. So don't make it theoretical, but bring it to life, you know, because you have a lot to offer, you know, and you might say, you know, there was nothing in my language, or it would really be helpful, or, you know, this was much easier, or this other company did it a different way. But you have to show that you are really engaged in the process.
Thank you, Bessie. An additional question came in about programming for international students. How do you recommend engaging with them on a timeline that may resemble someone interested in CPT or OPT? When is the best place to start? And do you have any recommendations for topics on a trajectory that would be suitable for someone who has just come to the United States and will be here for an extended period of time?
I think, you know, most of our universities, and I'm sure for many of you on the call, you do offer a lot of periodic programming about the opportunities and the need to understand OPT and CPT. I think what sometimes happens, the international students kind of tune it out until they get closer to the end. And they don't always see what it is that you're offering. One of the things that I do think is important that I don't see happening as much is understanding the difference between OPT STEM and OPT that's not STEM. And I really don't think that, I think that is something that should be offered early each year, because I think students sometimes are picking a non-STEM major and they don't understand that if they don't have STEM, they can only stay 1 year. But if they have a STEM degree, and now that our government has authorized 22 new additional STEM majors, how important it is to understand that, because when you have STEM certification, you can stay 1 year plus an additional 2. And that makes, you know, whether you stay for 3 years under OPT STEM or whether you stay longer and a company then sponsors you because you're in a STEM field, and that gives a better chance of an H-1B visa. That differentiation is something that I don't know that I've seen as much done on, and I think that would be very helpful. And I think finding a way that you get these students at the end when they've left it to the end, I don't know, you know, I just think they don't understand how important making these networks and relationships are early. And if they don't hear you early and then they come running in late, you know, they're at such a disadvantage. So I don't know how you convince them to learn early. So I think that I would love to hear what ideas you have for grabbing them early, but it's so important that they make other connections outside their own international student group. And so maybe fostering some ways to connect to other ERGs in the region, or connecting to chambers in the region, or connecting to homestay groups, or you know, for example, if they're involved in accounting, to the local accounting association or the engineering, maybe you need to bring in some of those outside functional groups to talk to the international students so they have an easier access to some native born people who are in their own job skill area, and kind of break that wall with the university, maybe based on their degree or their function. Help them do that. And maybe having a session. I mean, Kathy Bernard is an incredible speaker on LinkedIn, and she has a special presentation on LinkedIn for international students. And she has done that with us before. And I would definitely recommend Kathy Bernard at Wiser U. She has an incredible website. She has a special section of her website for international students using LinkedIn. And she is a guru and expert on LinkedIn. And I definitely would recommend you have a session with Kathy Bernard.
Those are wonderful recommendations. Thank you so much, Bessie. On behalf of the Midwest Association of Colleges and Employers, thank you for joining us today and sharing information about assisting international talent explore and define their personal career goals while developing the skills and confidence necessary to succeed in their job search. To learn more about Betsy Cohen and her book, Welcome to the USA, You're Hired, a guide for foreign-born people seeking jobs, please click the link in the chat box. And I'm sure, Bessie, is that the best way if someone wishes to reach out and potentially have you connect with their university career services? Is that also the best way that
Certainly
they
through the book, through LinkedIn. They can reach me on Gmail, Betsy H. Cohen, Betsy H. Cohen @gmail.com, or through the Mosaic Project. I mean, this all is connected to what we do to be welcoming. And so I'm interested if you have ideas, if you think that there should be things that I add into something future that we talk about, I'm really interested. Or if you have a different viewpoint on some of the things I've talked about, I would love to hear your viewpoint. I really just thought this was a chance to put my best thinking down. And then, I'm open to other ideas, and there will be more to come. But, I think that this was a way to get started on such an important topic, because our country needs the talent of foreign-born people. And we need the smarts, we need the skills, we need the global relationships. And it's just so important. And it's my personal mission to make sure that more international talent connects in the United States. So thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, John, and thank you, Karl.
Thank you, Betsy.
Wonderful. And again, we appreciate your participation in today's Midday Monday with Midwest ACE. Again, reference some of the information that is listed in the chat box, and we also encourage you to view additional virtual offerings from the Midwest Association of Colleges and Employers for upcoming events, in addition to our in-person summer conference in July 2022. So be on the lookout for some additional information about those events. Again, thank you so much, Bessie, and we look forward to engaging with you at future Midwest ACE virtual and hopefully in-person events.